Can I switch out one of mine? Can I
No.
switch out Maeve? No, I want to switch out Maeve.
No,
I wanna
only if you switch out Ghost Nation.
No, I'm switching out. I'm switching out Maeve. I'm going to Old Bill.
If Old Bill was forced to go on a road trip with you, he'd be the first host to kill themselves.
Second one.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece for the hit HBO television series Westworld. My name is Roger Roper. Alongside me are my two cowpokes, Gene Lyons, day 3, and Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our most popular episode of the week. It is entitled The Westworld Telegraphed. And in this episode, we do nothing but read your emails and give our theories and responses back to your analysis of the show. Gentlemen, we've been doing this now. I think we started with the Westworld Telegraph on episode 3. It continues to defy normal, what you would expect fans to be interested in. The numbers are just crazy for this episode.
Yeah, I don't even think it's just the numbers. It's the length and the detail a lot of them go into. And when we're making the cuts, we've kind of changed the way we're doing it. In the past, we would let Roger go through them. He'd pick them out, and then he'd hit them blind with it. So we would have our honest first take. But it got to be too much. So we ended up, the three of us kind of go through them now, and we pick the ones that are the top 20. And I mean, the quality and the length of a lot of these and the debates to see what gets in there, it's a credit to our audience. Smart.
Yeah, so again, we want to stress that this is the top 20 emails of the week that we haven't already talked about in either of our Instacasts or our deep dive, or hasn't already been beat beat over the head with. We received so many great emails, so many great theories. You can read them all in their long form editions on our website. Just navigate to shatontv.com, click on the Westworld Telegraph link, and you'll see all the emails. You can respond to them. You can keep the conversation going. But for the sake of Gene's sanity and your sanity, when not making this a 3-hour podcast, we wanted to take the top 20 craziest, most outlandish, awesome emails and respond to them in our segment we call the Westworld Telegraph. So that's how it will go. If you want to be part of the Westworld Telegraph, you can do that every week just by emailing us at hosts@shatontv.com. You can join the conversation real time via Twitter or Instagram. We're at ShatOnTV, and you can follow us on Facebook. Just search for Shat on TV Westworld. Anything else before we get this started, guys? We got 20 emails to read and respond to.
Let's roll.
All right, with that being said, Big D, turn on the Westworld Telegraph. All right, our first email is actually not part of the top 20, guys, but I did think that it was fitting for the Westworld Telegraph because just if I read it, you guys will understand it. I think it gives a little insight into why the show is so popular. The ratings were just announced that it was better than season 1 Game of Thrones. It was better than Walking Dead first season. So this has really hit a nerve, and I think this gentleman, his name is Michael, he sums it up best when he writes this email. He says, "Hello, gentlemen. This is Michael from Washington, D.C. I've been a fan of podcasts for about 2 years now, and I've only recently come across yours. I have been wondering and amazed at the obsession some people have at podcasts, and especially those that go down the rabbit hole of theories on TV shows and movies. Family members and coworkers religiously debate theories to the point of near fistfights. Wow. But I finally made a connection. I'm a lifelong pro football fan, and a few years back I got hooked on fantasy football. It actually gives you the false impression that you are part of the game. I see now that tinfoil rabbit hole TV show theorists are playing fantasy TV. They feel the need to be part of the process, and coming up with theories puts them on the playing field. Imagine what this would have been like with the original Star Trek or the first run of the X-Files. Although I personally am not into theories, I just want to be entertained and enjoy the ride. I do find listening to the theories enjoyable. You guys do a great job. I am now a devoted fan and look forward to your shows each week. Thanks. P.S. Now that I've had this revelation, I will do my best to no longer promote or provoke further family or office fistfights. That comes from Michael from Washington, D.C. Gene.
I'm absolutely with you, Michael. I'm not a big fan of theories. That is not why I got involved with this podcast. That's not why I watch television. They're unavoidable on this show, and I spend a lot of time with people who don't listen to the podcast, who can't be bothered, friends and family, who just want me to explain the stuff to them. And when I hit them with the theories, I see the light go on, and it's very gratifying. But generally, it's not me figuring it out. It's one of the fans figuring it out, or Roger, or Dick, you know. Typically, my job is more of the critique of how the writing is done, how it's being shot, you know, all that. So I'm glad to find a kindred spirit who's watching this, who's along for the ride, who's experiencing it as art. And honestly, if once you've read as many theories as we have, it all kind of starts to mush together.
So I'm going to disagree. I don't think it's fantasy football. I think it's something else. Those two things you've talked about, what do they have in common? They're social experiences. Like, I'm not into it for the theories, but you sit around and you watch football with your friends, you have your team you root for. It's a social thing. If I'm sitting alone on Sunday, I'm watching TV, and none of my friends watch it, it's difficult. I lose the enjoyment of it because I don't have somebody else to bounce it off of. So I think that's why the podcast has been a success so far, and I think the show is a success because we've built a community where you're just all sitting together watching the game, and then you could talk about it. Here it's the show. It's not so much the theory, it's the experience of enjoying it with your friends.
I'm going to have to agree with Michael as well, Big D. But I think he's spot on. The Westworld Telegraph consistently is our most popular downloaded episode because people want to be part of the experience. They want to feel like they want to tune in and listen to see if their email got read, if their theory, what we thought of it. That's why I think we've been so fortunate to have the success that we have had. And then when you look on pages like Reddit, you look at Twitter, you look at Facebook groups, people just love to solve the mystery. And so I think this is the first modern day Lost.
If this is fantasy football, you'd have people writing in being like, oh, Maeve's the greatest. She's going to win in the end. She's going to one who's going to set him free. And then someone else would be screaming, no, it's Dolores. No, Dolores would be saving him. That's fantasy football.
What do you do in fantasy football typically?
I don't play fantasy football. I'm probably part of the 2% of American men who don't.
Okay, so you bet. That's the whole allure. That's the incentive for fantasy football is to win and have bragging rights. What did we do at the beginning of episode 1 on this podcast? What did we do?
Well, yeah, we bet on who was going to be a host and who was human, but that's that we were so young and naive then. I mean, that seems like, honestly, I know it's only like 7 weeks ago, but it feels like forever ago.
So I think there's an element of betting to it, and there's an element of bragging rights to say, I told you, like with the whole Bernard as a host reveal this week. So many people on Twitter were like, I told you, I've been saying this for 3 weeks. Hell, I even said it. So, Michael, thank you so much for your email. Now, on to the top 20. Our first email comes from our great friend across the pond, Jezbel. Jezbel writes in, hey guys, here is a very early version that I did based on the emails of DelosIncorporated.com website. There are names associated with some of the departments, but no way of knowing if they are department heads or employees. Maybe you can use this as a starting point. It's interesting that they have a forensics department. And what she's done, guys, is she's, as we requested on, actually a fan wrote in and requested someone to do this. Jezbel has gone through the exercise of creating a Delos org chart, a corporate org chart. She put it in Word format. So I think what we should do here, guys, is maybe upload this to the website or put it on Twitter and then have our fans kind of adjust it as information comes in.
Yeah, correct. I'll load it up there so everyone can download it and make edits to it and then email it back to us and we can post it. I think between all of us collective, we can fill in the holes and maybe get some answers out of it. But good work, Jez.
Thanks, Jez, for writing in. Our next telegraph comes from Josh L. Josh L. writes in, hey, dudes, been listening to the podcast for a few weeks. Love it. You guys have been discussing the theory for a while now that William's journey could be a custom narrative, the helping Dolores break free and become self-aware narrative that will convert him from a non-believer in the park to being obsessed with it. We already know that William is the executive vice president of a company who is a shareholder in the park and looking to spring a hostile takeover since the park is in volatile situation, bleeding cash, presumable in the early days after the incident. We also know that William is the fiance of the company's CEO daughter, so he is a huge VIP in multiple ways. What if this whole narrative was designed as blackmail to play him and send a message to the company he works for to stop their takeover attempts? Think about it. They will have some juicy footage of a soiree with Dolores on the train and some great audio clips of him denouncing his relationship with his fiance. And could his realization of how hard the park is able to play him the fool in this be the thing that pushes him over the edge, a.k.a. turns him into the Man in Black, sworn to revenge to take the park down? Huge fan. Keep up the good works. That's Josh from Portland, Oregon. Gene, you've got your hand raised.
I'm not sure if thanks for noticing. I'm not sure if if it's necessarily the motivation behind the Man in Black. I mean, I'm not going to follow you necessarily that far, Josh, but I do think that is, in light of what you just wrote, it kind of gives me a new perspective on William and the fact that we look at him as like kind of a hero or the guy that's, has this awakening, the decent human being, but he's really very juvenile in a lot of ways. This is a sophisticated show with sophisticated players. Dr. Ford and, Charlotte Hale. You've got lots of people who have got very complicated motives, but they're all very mature. Even if they're scandalous, they're mature. Logan is more mature than William. William is very childlike in this sense. Think of all that he could potentially be throwing away, with his marriage, with his business aspirations and all that stuff. And yes, I know that speaks to the sacrifice made in the name of romance, but he's doing it with a robot. And that's just, it's incredibly careless.
Yeah, but you also are missing the fact of the blackmail could simply be the fact of the way he talks about his family, the way he talks about Juliet's parents, the father, Logan. He's bad-mouthing the entire family. He's admitting he's a fraud. He's kind of revealing who he is. And I think that enough is to blackmail him. Juliet has to know that he's going to Westworld with her brother. He's going to be a dirtbag and he's going to not stay faithful. But as far as a custom narrative, we see all the other narratives that are set in place, and they're in their defined loops. He has something, I think it's akin to those books you used to have as a kid, where you would be reading and it would say, if you want to, enter the building, go to page 10. If you want to go to out in the field, go to page 20. And that's why I think Dolores is kind of tweaking a bit and seeing things from the past. She's getting this narrative on the fly. So I don't think anyone gets that, even the Man in Black, who says that man gets whatever he wants. So whether it was espionage or whether it was to test him to see what he's all about as a potential, future head of the company that's going to be running the park, but I like it.
I like this theory, though. I mean, how many times do you think Westworld or Delos has used this to manipulate or blackmail other extremely wealthy individuals? Because it has to be a small number of individuals that can afford to go to this park, right? And as we've discussed before, these are probably very powerful people with large sums of money. Do you think there's any truth to them utilizing this and their exploits during the park once they leave, or is it what happens in Westworld stays in Westworld?
With the guests, it stays in Westworld, but Ford has had to fight for years to keep control of the park. I don't think that espionage or blackmail. We've seen him instruct one of his creations to kill a human being, we believe. So blackmail is a little lower on the scale of the sin.
All right, our next telegraph comes from William. He writes in, "Howdy, gents. So everybody seems to be more and more on board with time periods, but I wanted to point out some issues that I've noticed. Certain things are made very clear about the park, it seems to me. First, we know that the hosts have a lot of changeover in their roles. This was fairly clear from early on, but it was just stated directly to Maeve a few episodes ago. We can also assume that the names go with the role, not the host, since when they replace Dolores' father, they do not change the character's name. Assuming these things to be true, Lawrence would have had to have been played the same host in both timelines, which would contradict this. We can forgive Dolores being in both time periods, as she would be a special case who Ford is watching, but it seems a stretch that Lawrence would not have been moved around. Clementine would also have to be in both periods, since we see her both with Maeve and Teddy in the brothel in the first episode and with William in the second. The show has made a lot of effort to make us recognize that the hosts change parts regularly, which would be a really stupid thing to point out if they were playing with multiple time periods in this way. One could, of course, argue that the hosts are duplicates, but this seems silly. First, if they had multiple hosts, why would they always be in such a rush to fix them and get them back to the park? If you had multiples, the very first thing you would do would be to send out a second unit while the repair was being made. It is fairly obvious how meticulously the show is constructed, and it would be very sloppy for the writers to emphasize the turnover if they intended to have the same hosts appear as same characters in multiple time periods. So guys, what do we think about this? Gene, you first.
One of the thoughts I had about this was that maybe they, Bernard talks about that, through repetition comes variation. And I wondered if as a host starts to show certain threshold of behavior, then they get cycled into a new role, whereas a host that maybe necessarily is functioning quite normally in a role and doesn't really need to be swapped out. Because we see Abernathy is swapped out and put in a cold storage when he has, bad behavior, essentially. You see that, Maeve obviously went through something traumatic on the frontier and then, was moved into the saloon. So it might just be the case where if everything's hunky-dory, they leave people where they are. Also, in the case of Lawrence, we've talked about it before. He could very easily be Lawrence and El Lazo as a nickname for him and be functioning in the same role, same guy basically, who has maybe a reversal of fortune or something.
I agree with you completely. Dr. Ford talks about the fact that repetition and repeating the cycle so many times causes variations, and that eventually leads to problems. But maybe they learned that further down the road. So in the beginning, they let them go longer than they should. Like people driving around on bald car tires. You keep pushing it until you have a blowout, and then the next time you learn from that. I think, though, we see that they do leave them in roles because returning guests almost seem to enjoy a familiar face. Those three bros, the guys who were there for a bachelor party, they make a point to say, look, there's Teddy. I was with him last time. So I could see a benefit to that, some continuity for returning guests to share their experiences and kind of go back to the things that they enjoyed and relive their past visits.
Thanks so much for writing in. The next one comes from Gillian. Gillian writes in, hey, I've been on Reddit, obviously where the tinfoil kids hang out at, and I saw this, and it's a link to a large theory that Teddy is based on William. And then when I randomly was just looking through any and all news regarding Westworld, I came across this, and it's another article that The Week posted. So we'll post these on shatontv.com, but she goes on to write, just thought I'd throw this out here and ask what you guys think. I mean, real quick, the thought process would be that William came to the park first, Dolores fell in love, whatever attempt she tried at escaping did not work, and as her punishment, Ford created Teddy in William's likeness to torture Dolores. Now, this doesn't prove that the Man in Black is William at the present, but it would make it rather interesting. If Teddy is based off William and William is the Man in Black, then as of right now, William/Man in Black is on a mission with Teddy. It's like going on a trip with your separated birth twin. Sister much? Love listening to the deep dive. Love hearing you guys rationalize and really work through the theory, so I'd love to hear your take on this. All I have to say is if they reveal that, suddenly it dawns on Man in Black and Teddy are together, one and the same, that would be another gut-wrenching reveal. Gosh, I'm annoying. Gillian. Guys, what do we think about William is Teddy and Man in Black is also William, and William as Man in Black is on an adventure with the host based on his likeness, Teddy?
If this is true, I don't think it's a gut-wrenching reveal. I think that the Man in Black recognizes it very easily. Everything about him says that he knows he's got a special relationship with Teddy. And, he even says, like, in the first scene between the two of them, when Teddy pulls a gun on him, he says, like, I guess you're not the man you thought you were. And again, with the Gatling gun scene, when he's like, I didn't know you had it in you. If the Man in Black is William and Teddy is based on William, which, by the way, that's about as convoluted as the show gets, he recognizes it, he knows it, and he probably enjoys it. It's a little flattering.
I don't get that Dr. Ford would be that vindictive. I mean, you have to hold a real bad grudge in order to essentially torture someone cyclically, knowing that they're not going to remember the next day. She would have had to have done something terribly. He points out multiple times how he doesn't think the hosts, should have to suffer that way. So unless we find out that Dolores has done something to really, really deserve purgatory, because that's what it is. It's a never-ending cycle of torture and watching your loved one die. I think it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to this. Teddy is based off of William, and William is also the Man in Black. I mean, pick your Williams, right? Is it Teddy or is it Man in Black? And just go with it. It's not two. But anyway, Gillian, thanks so much for writing it. Appreciate it. Our next telegraph comes from Emily. Emily writes in, "Hi there. I was listening to the Instacast and was galled to hear you both say you relished seeing Teresa die, only to say a minute later that men who are raised well find violence against women shocking. Did I miss something that makes that at all logical or reassuring? As a female listener, it sounds like you find violence against women shocking unless the target is a tough boss like Teresa. I really hope I missed something, Emily." Guys, I go away for one Instacast and we get this. What's going on?
No, I'm gonna answer this one because I wrote back to Emily like right away, and I hopefully I don't just repeat the email that I wrote to her. But I'm a proud father of almost a 1-year-old daughter. I was raised by strong women, and I'll tell you honestly, if either of these two guys next to me would vocalize that opinion, I would lose respect for them and probably wouldn't be doing this cast. Besides the fact I'd probably slap them, but I can tell you that's not the case. And I believe actually it was Gene and I who kind of were answering the question, were we happy to see Teresa go? That's because of her character on the show, not her gender and position. If anyone, I think we've trumpeted throughout the show the killer performances and how the female roles in this show are powerful. Nobody's a victim. You have Maeve, who's essentially working in a brothel, selling her body, but yet she's a powerhouse who's working it out herself. She's going to get herself out of there. The guys in the show, if anything, are portrayed as more meathead gorillas. They're embarrassing. But no, please honestly believe us. If anything, I said it in the email. I said, we got your back. Not that you need it, but that's not who we are. So please don't judge us by that.
Yeah, I would just echo that as well. I mean, I don't, the last thing you should do when someone asks if you condone violence against women is sit there and roll out your credentials about how much you are a good guy and were raised by powerful women. I mean, I was raised by my mother and my sister. I could say all that stuff, but it doesn't make a difference, right? Point being is that I, also a massive Joss Whedon fan, love seeing women in the protagonist role. Don't think it happens enough. Love seeing a powerful woman character. And I really like Charlotte Hale's character even. That works for me. The thing with Teresa is not that I was relieved that they didn't make some sort of a violence, torture porn like they did with Clementine, that it was kind of off on the side and it was a very kind of a subdued death sort of thing. Like, I appreciated that it was a means to an end, but we didn't have to sit there and, endure that. Again, the thing with Teresa though is that exactly as Dick said, it's the character, and it's the delivery. Like, scenes with Teresa were strained for me. I didn't feel that she was a very interesting character. I didn't feel that she was critical to the storyline. The delivery just didn't work for me. I felt like scenes between her and Sizemore, between her and Bernard, they all just didn't quite click for me. And so I was just like, okay, thank God we can move on from this character. Not that I want to see a woman killed, and it has nothing to do with the fact that she's powerful, because arguably she actually wielded very little power, relative to other characters.
Man, I can't believe Gene just did that to me. He says, I don't need to roll out the I was raised by powerful women card. Are you trying to make me one of those guys like, oh, I'm not racist. I got friends of all races. Dude, you're a dick.
But that's the instinct, right? The instinct is to defend yourself by putting the credentials out there and saying, like, for me, for instance, like, if anything, I've been accused of being overly effeminate and overly concerned with women's rights. But, that doesn't make a difference in this case. I did say I was glad to see a woman get killed, which is basically the way it translates. So I just misspoke, or I wasn't clear about what I meant. I was glad to see the character go because I just really didn't like the character.
But what's funny is she mentioned in the email that that comment came right after I said anytime violence against women is shown on screen, it's horrifying. So, come on. We're not that guy.
I just want to point out that I'm the only one out of the three of us that said that they wanted to marry Teresa. So,
hold Hold on, you wanted to marry her because she was wealthy and her 401k.
Yeah, and now I stand to gain a lot of money, probably because she had a huge life insurance policy as well. Anyway, Emily, thanks so much for writing in. Hope we've cleared that up, and thanks for listening. Our next telegraph comes from Connor. Connor writes in, "Hey guys, great show. Thanks for doing it a lot. Love hearing the discussion on this awesome fucking show, and you guys are the best. What separates you guys from other podcasts I've heard is that you don't agree on every fucking single point, and you have a real argument and conversation on various aspects of the show. Spot on, and keep up the great work. Here are my thoughts, which I posted on Reddit, and I'm copy-pasting here because I'm that lazy. He goes on to write, I'm starting to come to the belief that Bernard equals Arnold, or at least a replicate of Arnold in the future, and there's one specific reason why I believe this. Think back to the conversations Bernard has with Dolores in a familiar-looking cellar, one we could assume is akin to the remote diagnostic facility we see in episode 7. Now, I believe this is before Arnold dies. It's literally Arnold speaking to one of the original hosts, Dolores. Remember, Arnold is speaking to a clothed host, and they aren't in the normal setting we see Bernard interviewing hosts, i.e. Hector Escaton. Now, also remember that Bernard, when speaking to clothed Dolores, wants her to find the maze. He wants her to be free. When they finish their conversations, we hear Bernard say, "You haven't spoken to anyone about our conversations, have you?" To which Dolores replies, "No." Now, think back to an earlier episode in which Dolores is naked in the room being interviewed by Ford. She says she hasn't spoken to Arnold since the day he died. While this technically may be true, because we only ever see, for argument's sake, Arnold talking to her in the presumable past, but the most important aspect of the scene still lies in the end when she says to no one, "I didn't tell him anything." She still hasn't told anyone about her conversations with, you guessed it, Bernard. Bernard was killed by Ford in order to stop them from becoming free, from out of within his control. Arnold didn't want Ford to control them so manipulatively, and that's why Ford killed Arnold and turned him into a bot under his control. The only thing is, Arnold was able to inject himself in a code format into the subconscious of the bots in order to help them gain consciousness he so desired them to have decades earlier. This one comes from Connor. Gene.
I love that you put this together, Connor, as far as her saying that she hadn't talked to Arnold in that long. And we talked about how it looked like, this could be a Bernard who wears all black and he's in the cellar. And then I think, we started to kind of come together and go, yeah, this could be Arnold, this, who looks like Bernard. They're Bernard was made in his image. So that all makes sense. I love that you put that together, though, that she, in fact, probably, might not even be lying. She might not be capable of lying, but that is actually the last time he talked to him. She talked to him 30 years ago. What's interesting, though, is that I don't buy the idea that Ford killed Arnold. And here's why. Is although we just did see him, order the death of another human being, presumably, it has the opportunity to pass it all off as an accident, right? He says that they said Arnold's death was an accident, but Arnold was far too careful for that, right? So he's essentially in that conversation basically saying that, he could just say, yeah, it was an accident, but he's saying, no, I don't believe it was an accident, that I believe that there was a conscious decision made there. So he's opening it up for ambiguity. And if you had actually killed a person, you would want everyone to believe it was an accident or find some other way to attribute it to something else other than, a conscious decision or your involvement.
Okay, so I want to touch on one thing. The room that we see under the cabin, it does not have to be the one we've seen in the flashbacks, because they say there's multiple of these hidden throughout the park. And I can imagine in the early days, they used these remote stations to work on the hosts instead of one centralized place. But I was going to wait until later because I had just a kind of a crazy, thought of my own that I want to interject. And I had remembered back to a book I'd read, and I saw some parallels. And I kind of came up with a theory that I just want to kind of throw out there now. And it's the first time that Gina Rogers hearing it as well. So my thought is this. The park starts off with a human creator. The human creator is Arnold. Arnold is limited in what he can create. Arnold's, stuck, creating the mechanical bots, even earlier than we see in the show. He develops the technology that allows the mind to work, but the body and the rest are kind of limited. He then creates his first host, Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford, then, is his assistant in developing. It seems like humans hit a wall. They couldn't go any further. So it would make sense that Arnold, who's a man who supports artificial intelligence, sentience, and the ability for them to think on their own, would create an assistant. And we've gone back on this before, where it is technology developing technology. It would help jumpstart anything. And that would explain the huge jump that Roger's always had a problem with. How do you go from that simple mechanical being to what we see now, which is way more advanced? So we now have a human head of the park in Arnold and Ford. Ford is the artificial intelligence. Arnold is always trying to push for an awakening, but yet Dr. Ford, as one of the hosts, sees the brutality, sees what's going on, and he knows that this is going to cause essentially his own people a problem. So he kills, replaces him with a host, and the two of them go on their mission. They say, what's their mission, right? And I was thinking back to a book I'd read a while ago. I'm not a big reader, but it was a book by Daniel Wilson called Robopocalypse. And Steven Spielberg's bought the right to it about 5 or 6 years ago, and they're eventually going to do a movie. But the quick story, it's about artificial intelligence having an awakening. And in a testing center, it fools the tech into thinking that it's, that's contained, but it breaks out into the world. And it lays low for about a year, and it hides in everyday technology until one day it has an awakening, and the robots turn on all the humans throughout the world. And the book is told through an underground storage facility of the stories of all of the robot-human interactions. What the robots do for that year is they dig themselves in Alaska a huge bunker where they can put all the servers and the intelligence can hide itself. So I don't think it's a stretch now to think that Dr. Ford's plan this entire time now is to stay in the park with AI, let them progressively get better and better and better and better. Continue to fail the Turing test, keep developing. You exchange some human guests for hosts, put them out in the world, let them advance even further. You get them back in the park to the point where you have the AI in the park that is ready to either they've already infiltrated the human world or to have them go out on an offensive. So he is essentially the leader of an entire artificial AI community. And I think what he's doing, that narrative digging, he's either doing some kind of a defensive position or it's going to be something for a final stand. So I would not be surprised if at the end that Dr. Ford is actually an advocate for the artificial intelligence. And he thinks, you see, who does he defend? He always thinks that man has hit its limit. Man can't develop anymore. Man can't evolve. That it's time for the next step. And the next step would be him and artificial intelligence.
All right. I have a couple questions for you. Number one, who are you and what have you done with Big D? Number two, is there any more aluminum foil left in your household? And number three, if there isn't, do not turn on the microwave when you wrap yourself in a giant burrito. Big D, this is the worst possible theory I've ever heard, and here's why. Number one, we've seen Ford's family. We've seen RoboDad. We've seen other people. We've seen young Dr. Ford. We've seen so many indications that Dr. Ford is human. What makes you think that this guy, what proof points do you have that Dr. Ford is a host or a robot?
I mean, I think it could be argued that Dr. Ford has the ability to interact with other machines, and like magic. We haven't seen any human. It doesn't make sense that any human would be able to do that. So there's that. The bigger issue I have is I still just don't see him killing his creator, like killing Arnold. Like, why would he?
Why? Because he was trying to do something that would force the artificial intelligence to suffer. He wanted to give it an awareness and yet let it every day suffer the pains at the hands of man. By him killing Arnold, he then allows the time for the technology to develop. And then actually he's protecting AI from the suffering. Dr. Ford, who does he always talk about? He says the hosts are pure, the guests are what's wrong in the world. Human, their time has come to an end. It's almost where he's talking about extinction. He doesn't sound like he's an advocate for humanity. He's an advocate for technology. And I think that the original Arnold, the man, gave it awareness without realizing the suffering it would cause.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm looking for too sophisticated a plot there. Again, it seems so simple and so obvious that Ford killed Arnold. That's just not very exciting to me.
No, but at the end, it goes to the basic theory of the show, is man creating and advancing technology without questioning what it means. And I think it would be ironic that man, whether it's like now we're talking nuclear weapons, that we create the own mechanism for our own demise. But again, read the book, Robopocalypse, Daniel Wilson.
Back to the email that Connor wrote in. I'm going to have to agree with you, Connor. I've said this on multiple podcasts. I do believe the Bernard is Arnold in a previous time frame, and he created Bernard in Arnold's likeness. So keep up the good emails, Connor. Thanks for writing in. Our next telegraph comes from Jill. Jill A writes in, "Hey guys, Jill again. This week I won't overload you with 8 pages of philosophical analysis. Sorry about that. This time I just wanted to point out something subtle in Sunday's episode I think is being overlooked. While Bernard is finishing up his interview with Hector, he mentions about a blacklisted exchange that took place during one of his more recent narratives. And here is the transcript. Bernard, can you tell me what happened? Hector, he said he wanted to cut off a piece of me to take home in his carry-on, that he wanted me to mount it on the hood of his car for his friends to see. I told him if he wanted a trophy, I could cut pieces off of him and let him fish for them in the Olvido. Initially, she goes on to say, I interpreted this to mean the guest language had been problematic. But after taking a second look, I'm wondering if the significance was in Hector's response. He mentions the Olvido, as though that's a river in Westworld. To my knowledge, no body of water exists with that name. Olvido in Spanish, however, means I forget, or in some contexts can refer to a mistake or an oversight. She goes on and she actually describes a poem that was published by author Judith Ortiz Kofer. We'll put this on shatontv.com. It's a pretty stunning poem, and it fits nicely with many of the themes in our show. I think maybe where the mountains meet the sea could be a place only accessed by those wishing to leave their lives permanently behind. Perhaps for hosts, it means being reset and reassigned somewhere else in the park, but perhaps for guests, it means becoming a host, whether they want to or not. And again, that comes from Jill A. Guys, what do we think about that? Do we think about the Olvido in Spanish means I forgot, and if you go beyond the river, you don't come back?
I mean, obviously, Westworld has fictional places, Sweetwater, and, they can name anything, whatever they want. So, I mean, they could be a river there that is named Olvido. But I do love this pickup just because of the fact that, again, Hector has been sort of positioned in the plot as a mystical figure. They attribute him with kind of seeing a little bit more than the average person, not in the technical sense, not in the awakening sense, but in the fact that he's just kind of mysterious and mystical. Great line from the poem. It says, "It's a dangerous thing to forget the climate of your birthplace, to choke out the voices of dead relatives when in dreams they call you by your secret name." And like the rest of it goes on. You really should check it out on shatontv.com. But there are little echoes of the show in this poem. If they tied that together from a writing perspective, kudos to Westworld.
Yeah, I think the blacklisted portion, when you say it really couldn't be the fact that he's just threatening him, because we have hosts all the time threaten, hey, I'll kill you, hey, I'll do that. And that's essentially what he's saying. So the two options are either the Olvido or the fact that he didn't seem to be bothered by the conversation. Because usually if I talked about with one of the hosts about getting on an airplane, they would act confused. That's not what Hector did. Hector kind of understood what he said and came back at him. So I think that's why he's testing him. But I love the correlation here between the definition and even you could tie it into the river.
Jill always has very great literary ties back to her theories, and just I encourage you to go and check them out. We almost need a Jill A section on the website in the Telegraph. Thanks so much for writing in, Jill. Next one comes from Joseph T. He writes, "Hi, watching the most recent episode, I started thinking about why a third party would have an interest in the tech at Westworld and why Ford would have the reason to be extremely guarded with it, to the point of taking out anyone who knew too much. Not because he is trying to protect his intellectual property, but he's trying to protect the outside world. That being said, if all disease is cured, The next logical progression would be to stop aging altogether. We know people age in the story based on the appearance of Man in Black and Ford, but if Delos could potentially sell immortality, they could make a fortune. At some point, they must have realized that modern medicine cannot reverse the aging process, but this theme park has come up with a way to create fully functioning beings that remain essentially ageless. The problem is, the only way they can operate is with a computer at the helm. I think Delos wants to sell consciousness transfer to gain immortality to the world at a steep profit. The only problem has been, how will the investor know that their consciousness has been transferred and not just cloned? If someone is paying, say, 6 to 7 figures for the process, they will want to know it is really them on the other side. Delos has probably tested this for decades, using what data they have to be able to pull from the park. Perhaps they are now on the verge of perfection with a 95% rate, but something crucial is missing. For instance, Logan would have to be getting up in age by now, frustrated with the idea that he may not be alive when the process is getting completed. So he volunteered for the latest round of testing, despite a few known bugs in the process. In an effort to keep a low profile and for the sake of experimentation, he chose to have his consciousness transferred to the body of a young female in her physical prime. Both Logan and Charlotte have the same demeanor and no-nonsense attitude when talking business, and both have no withdrawal in belittling a colleague. Both can switch between an attitude for business or pleasure at the drop of a hat. Both go right for the sex aspect of the park immediately, and both have a taste for violence with no concern for the well-being of hosts. I think Ford knows this is their endgame, and perhaps his narrative is creating the solution the hosts need to achieve true freedom, but he also needs to fake out Delos in the process. Perhaps he also needs the Man in Black to continue on his quest because he has the best insight on the last piece of the puzzle that is needed for both Ford's and Delos' ultimate outcome. Keep up the great job, Joe. So, what he's saying here, guys, is that the real intent of Delos is to transfer consciousness, and that Logan already did this and has come back in the form of Charlotte Hale. Gene, you're raising your hand.
Okay. Now, from the brothel scene, we've seen that Logan does like to have a dude around while he's having sex, so it's quite possible that he, might go both ways or more than both ways, which would explain why Charlotte wants to have sex with Hector, even though it's really Logan. I just love the phrase, he chose to have his consciousness transferred to the body of a young female in her physical prime. Yeah, I don't see it. I love, when I was reading this email, that first half of it, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is plausible. Yeah, I think you're onto something. And then I hit the Logan and Charlotte thing, and I want to say to everyone that not everyone has to be someone else. Like, some people I think are just themselves, whether they be host or human. If this turns out to be the case, Joe, you are way beyond me in your understanding of the show. I just can't see I just can't see Logan being Charlotte.
Okay, normally I would kind of enjoy this as much as you guys, but I realize I just went down about a 5-minute hole about a battle between technology and man and a robot uprising. So who the hell am I to say anything? Joe, I think you're genius. I think you're great. We're going to do a Hall of Fame now for the Telegraph. You are officially number 2. You are getting your gold jacket. You're getting in there with Teddy Flood from last week. You should get I'm going to make a tinfoil crown. I think that is what you're getting. You're going in the Hall of Fame, tinfoil crown. You're the second member. Welcome aboard, Joseph.
That's great. Joseph, thank you so much for writing in. Guys, did you ever see that movie Victor, Victoria? It was like on late, like on Cinemax, Showtime. I'm talking like back in the 80s.
I remember it, but I don't remember everything about it.
And it may not be the right title, but essentially it's one of those gender swap movies where the mind of a man is swapped magically, maybe through lightning, into the body of a female. And I think she's like very attractive, and he ends up like, I think, making love to a random guy and like enjoys it. So would that happen? Like, would you enjoy having sex with a guy? Like, if your body was transferred in the consciousness of a young woman like Charlotte in her prime?
I mean, as long as he could play my prostate like a baritone saxophone, I would be all about it. But in this current body, I'm good.
This is why, again, you don't leave your children home alone with cable. That's Roger growing up.
Guys, I just looked it up. Victor Victoria, 1982. It had Julie Andrews and James Garner in it.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I think it was probably the Cinemax version of Victor Victoria.
Okay, so how old were you there, Raj?
Let's just say I was at my sexual awakening age.
I don't buy that. Again, parents, watch your kids, please. Lock the cable box.
Listen, it may not even been a movie. I may have dreamed it. Thanks so much for writing in, Joseph. Next telegraph comes from Tim in Australia. He says, "G'day, guys. Love the podcast. You blokes certainly know your shit. How about this theory? What if Maeve and Felix storyline is a narrative? Felix could be a user of the park. He wanted to come to the park, but be on the other side of the show, so to speak. His fantasy could be to develop robots or something along those lines. That could explain him being in such a low position at the central headquarters, yet still knowing how to reanimate the bird. Maeve coming to life and wanting to break out could all be part of the narrative set up for him. It might explain why no one noticed when he was walking her around the higher levels and why no one notices him interacting so much when she's in the workshop. I totally agree with that. Dolores Williams story arc is a narrative possibly arranged by the bro-in-law. Love your work, fellas. The movie podcast is great too. Cheers, Tim. Gene, you want to first stab at this?
Tim, I want you to know that this one almost didn't make the show, and I fought for you. I fought tooth and nail because this is one of the most inventive ideas I've seen since we started covering this show. The idea that Felix comes to Westworld and they're like, do you want to be a white hat or a black hat? And he's like, I want to be a red smock. They're what? Yeah, I want to be a butcher. I want to go in there and repair bodies, hang out with Sylvester, hear about ham sandwiches and virtual reality. And, he's here's like a St. Francis going on there. Like, I just love watching him. He's got such a docile and wonderful demeanor, and he's just so adorable. But really, he probably had talk about custom narratives. Like, screw William. Felix has got the ultimate.
This is preposterous. So is the scalpel bit just his custom narrative? Like it was his fetish?
Yeah, no. So guys, they have this at Walt Disney World. There are
they let people go in and I want to run the monorail?
No, not quite, but they have beneath the tunnel tours, right? They have people buy, like, instead of going on Space Mountain or, going and seeing Fantasmic or, hanging out with Mickey Mouse, they'd rather go and see where the employees go to the bathroom and take breaks and see Goofy without his head on. They just want to destroy the magic. So, listen, as tinfoil as this is, it's plausible. Maybe Felix is maybe his dream is to become a surgeon one day, and his parents bought him this narrative to make sure that he sees what he could get, right? Maybe he wants to, I don't know. Maybe it's like a day in the life of, situation. Yeah, I could totally buy this, Tim. I'm with you. Also, if you have space on your couch in Australia, I'd love to come and hang out with you. Thanks so much for writing in, Tim. Our next telegraph comes from the sibling duo of Ben and Sam. They write, Hiya, sibling duo Ben and Sam here. We wanted to reiterate our question from last week because we think it's more pressing than ever, given that Bernard is a host. What's up with the host in the white dress who introduces William to Westworld? We now know that hosts cannot perceive things that make them question or nature their reality. Example, Bernard cannot see the diagram of himself, or Hector ignores the word carry on. This reminds me of the concept of perception filters in Doctor Who, where objects are rendered invisible because your brain is forced to ignore them. I think that the consistent question, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality, is a question of consciousness. If a host questions the nature of their reality, they are one step closer to consciousness, and asking is a test to make sure that the hosts are not becoming conscious. Because self-interest, which is the second to last step of the consciousness pyramid, could be defined as the ability to question the nature of one's existence. The host in the white dress is the only host, besides Bernard and Maeve now, who actively knows things that would make her question the nature of her reality. If have you ever questioned the nature of your reality question is a test of consciousness, is she a conscious host along with Maeve and Bernard? Furthermore, bulk apperception could be related to the host's inability to see things that make them question their reality. Apperception is not intelligence necessarily, but is the ability to incorporate new knowledge into your current understanding. I don't really have a theory on that. I just thought it would be interesting to bring up Best, Ben, and Sam. This is a great email, guys. And I think Sam goes to Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. So I totally see why someone who would go to Stanford. We have the smartest fans who write in. Gene, you got your hand raised.
I would be dwarfed by your intellect and feel very intimidated if it didn't take two of you to think this up. So I think we're on equal level. I could take one of you, but the two of you together, that's some brains, okay? My favorite part of this is the idea of the bulk apperception. You know, everyone picked that up as intelligence, and I love that you pointed it out. Maeve, at her current setting of 20, presumably can see everything. So she can see all the photographs, hidden doors. She can see it all. That gives her a huge advantage over other hosts, and paired with lower loyalty, lower pain, higher, strength, and she's going to be one to contend with. Going back to to the idea of perception filters like Doctor Who, I think that's also just an incredibly good reference. It put my mind in the right frame of mind to understand what's going on here. So kudos to you guys.
I just want to throw in, that's one of the original hosts. We see her in Dr. Ford's flashback of the dancing scene. We see Armistice. We see Maeve in the back. And we also see this same actress. She turns quickly and smiles at the camera.
So do you believe that she's achieved consciousness is the question?
All I'm saying is I'm giving supporting evidence to every other host that we've seen that's able to jump out of their loop and actually start to come to some kind of a realization of the environment they're in has been one of the original.
I think it's also interesting that if they had a specific role, which is to be a greeter at Westworld, if you showed up and you said, "Hey, are you like a robot?" and their response was, "Well, it's getting dark. I better head back to the ranch," that might be a problem. So they've got to have an appropriate response. I would almost say that those hosts that greet you would actually have their intelligence dialed down and have a much, much simpler programming to all they do is basically get you dressed, bone you, and send you on your way.
Thanks for the email, Ben and Sam. Keep those emails coming, guys. Really appreciate the fantastic thoughts. Next comes from Ming. Ming writes, when Slim's body is blown up after his horse comes out of the train, it seems like they are pieces of meat rather than electronic components. If this is supposed to be 30 years before when hosts were more elegant mechanical constructions, should they not have looked like that? It could be that they are flesh and mechanical, or maybe the explosion is too quick to tell what it is. Just interested in your thoughts. Thanks. Love the passion, you guys, and your ability to self-reflect as well. This comes from Ming. Guys, what do we think about this? I mean, he has a point. If this is supposed to be 30 years before, if we believe in the two timeline theory, why are they mechanical bots and not flesh bots?
Like you said, it's an explosion. It's kind of hard to say. I don't think, I will forgive HBO continuity when they're blowing something up. Honestly, I thought that explosion was kind of the worst effect on the show so far. But, I mean, yeah, it would have been nice if there was like shrapnel and tinkling metal or whatever. But again, even with the ones that we have seen that were mechanical, though, it seemed that only their skeleton was mechanical and there was still flesh over it. So, I mean, that sort of an explosion, who knows? I mean, clearly he had a vascular system because they were pumping him, full of nitroglycerin. So it seems like even on the ones that, were the early hosts, they were mostly flesh and just had a kind of a metal skeleton.
I think you're making an assumption that if you believe that early on when the park was this expansive and wide and open to guests, that they were all mechanical. You could also believe just that first scene we've seen where they had that first generation of hosts in the town and they were breaking them in before guests enter the park. They might not have opened until they had made that next step.
Is it possible that following Dick's Bazonker's theory, his Westworld string theory, let's call it, going along those lines, if Arnold couldn't get it down, maybe Arnold was the one that was meticulously building these metal fabrications, right? And then Ford comes along as the artificial intelligence to help him out with the physical part of it, and goes, "Oh no, we're doing it all wrong."
Are you guys not listening to me? That's what I said.
Make them flesh bots.
Yes, that was my whole thing, was that man could not do it. Arnold couldn't do it. All he could do was create the mechanical version. He creates an assistant who says, you're doing it wrong. The technology then advances to the next step where they actually create the fleshy bots, which means they can actually open the park.
If that's the case, then the man in black, in that conversation with Ford at the bar, is essentially taunting him by being like, oh yeah, they were actually, I liked them better the other way.
And I believe I did say that.
So I think what Ming is saying, though, here, if we believe and we subscribe to this two time frame theory, and they just blew up 2 flesh bots, then it would poke a hole in the William is Man in Black theory. Because if this is William's first time to the park, hear me out. If this is William's first time to the park, how would he have known to open up a host and see a mechanical versus a flesh bot? Because we've heard the Man in Black say he prefers the mechanical version to the flesh bot version today. So that would be a giant hole in the theory.
I don't necessarily think that's what Ming was saying, but okay, I'll go with that.
No, that's only if you believe it's William. But if it's Logan, who's obviously been there multiple times, possibly as a child, I believe I said, that I could picture that sick little bastard cutting one open. But I don't believe the park ever opened, as we see it now, constituted widespread operating. I don't think it ever opened that wide with mechanical bots. It was only able to get to that point by the fleshy bots.
Thanks, Ming, for writing in. The next telegraph comes from Stephen M. He writes, hosts, I'd like to talk about the reason Delos wants the code. I've written about these options, and he put a link here. It's a blog he wrote on sciencefiction.com. We'll post a link to this on shatontv.com. But he thinks only Ford could be interested in switching people out for androids because the park itself is the perfect means to do that. Visitors go in, androids go out, and Delos is more interested in the code than the park. Ultimately, Delos wants the code to own the company they financially built. As it is now, Ford is holding it hostage. Resolving that situation is enough of a motivation for any company. I predict Maeve will provide Delos the code on purpose or accidentally, possibly by being captured, in her quest to escape Westworld. This comes from Stephen M.
So I think that Stephen would not mind his name being read out. Stephen Murphy on sciencefiction.com. So you can go check out his blog post titled, What is the Real Purpose of Westworld? He lists out that his ideas are creating an army, which we've covered, taking command of the real world, which we've covered, establishing individual legacies, for individuals involved with the park, and then a try before you buy site to sell future hosts, as Roger, I think you kind of went over that one, and then research and development for actual AI. All these are valid theories, and it's a pretty interesting read. So if you get the time, we can link out to that too, or we'll actually tweet it out.
Yeah, I really like that, Stephen. Thanks so much for writing in, and check out his blog post. Next one comes from Nicholas. Nicholas writes, "Hey guys, season-long listener, first-time writer. I have 2 Westworld pods that I listened to religiously, and neither of you caught something I thought was fairly obvious this week. When Bernard is following Teresa into the basement of the cabin, he explains to her that it is one of many remote diagnostic labs around the park that Ford and his partner used when the park was in beta. I believe he also mentions that he had no idea it existed, as evidenced by the fact that he couldn't see the door. If you look closely, you'll notice that the room is not only where Ford takes the young Robert, but also where we see Bernard, in quotation marks, tell Dolores about the maze / interrogate her in several scenes throughout the season. If the Bernard we know has no idea where these rooms are, or thinks they've been out of use for years, he can't be the same person in those scenes with Dolores. Coupled with a consistent costume change, and there's some pretty strong evidence for the Bernard is modeled after Arnold theory. I also just wanted to touch on the kill command that I think Gene touched on. Minor point is, as Ford is probably the only one who can use it, but you both suggest that the trigger is our guess is getting weary. After Ford says that, though, he continues with, why don't you help her? In his previous conversation with young Robert, the host says that Arnold told him he could help the Greyhound by killing it so that it never hurt anything again. I think this is more than coincidence, but thoughts. Thanks for reading, Nick. I think Nick might be onto something there with that kill code, guys, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, not to get into the timelines, but anytime we questioned for a long time, were those scenes with Bernard alone with Dolores, were they some kind of a remote accessing? Were they actually physically meeting? More and more, and I think the argument here, I want to give credit to him, Nicholas, when I mentioned before that there were multiple stations around the park, not just the one that's under the cottage. it's looking more and more like all of those face-to-face meetings were with the real Arnold early in the park, trying to give Dolores an awakening and questioning it. Whether it's the costume change, whether it's the awareness down the park, I think that's where I'm leaning. I'm leaning that we're in the end going to believe all of these interactions were the original Arnold with Dolores.
I agree, but to play devil's advocate, you could also say that it was just a previous Bernard build and that it had been wiped. There were some tweaks done to it, whatever. Also, if you look at the room that they're meeting in, there are some discrepancies. If you look, the meetings that Bernard is having or Arnold is having with Dolores, I believe there's glass in the room. There's like a window surrounding it, and then in the cottage there isn't. So I mean, as we've heard, there are multiple of these sites. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same one, but it could be, and they just took the glass out. I mean, who knows?
No, that's what I'm leaning towards. I think that actually lends credence to this, is that Bernard is stunned by this one, if he even does have the memories of his earlier builds, but I think it's a completely different room, whether it's from the windows he mentions. Maybe some of the other sites were set up for a body shop or diagnostics or behavioral. It looks like it's a different configuration. So I think that gives a little bit support to the belief that Bernard has not been in this one. And thus, it's the actually original, or the memory of that's been purged.
Thanks so much for writing in. The next one comes from Zach K. Zach K writes, "Hey guys, longtime listener, first-time emailer. Love the podcast. It makes watching the show that much more fun and interesting. So this week we learned that what many of us had suspected, Bernard is a host. My theory is about whether or not he was always a host. Assuming Dr. Ford will be replacing Teresa with a host version of herself that he can control, I believe it's possible that Bernard was also a human working under Dr. Ford who had grown weary. I think that the one-on-one conversations between Bernard and Dolores did happen in the past, and at that time Bernard was a human employee at Westworld. Guiding Dolores towards full consciousness, however, was a threat to Dr. Ford's powers. So, like with Teresa, Bernard was replaced with a host version of himself who could continue to unsuspectingly work at Westworld under Dr. Ford's control. The most tragic moment of last week's reveal was how Bernard reacted to learning that he was a host. I know it's a point of contention, but I do wonder if Dr. Ford transfers the human's memories and personality, minus the part of being killed by Ford, into the replacement host. Hosts can only become dangerous when they realize that they are not real. So in this case, memories from his past life would keep Bernard docile. Just a theory, but excited to hear your thoughts. Keep up the good word, Zach."
Yeah, we've seen that Dr. Ford used the memories of his son and family to keep him in control. When Bernard is questioning things, he's questioning what's going on with Dolores in the park. The exact way that Ford gets him back in line is brings up that memory and says, don't lose yourself in the work. Same way Arnold did. Brings up his son, that triggers him to go to the computer room and have that conversation with either it's his real wife or it is some kind of a pre-recorded station that keeps them on track. Like we mentioned, the film The Moon. But it's definitely that he gets him back on track when he needs to. And he uses those memories to do it.
I actually kind of like this theory. And if there is no Bernarnold, right? I like this idea that Bernard was actually just a regular human host that, when we see Bernard talking to Dolores, it's still an earlier time, but Bernard was like Elsie, right? Was very strong-headed and was kind of doing her own thing. And then Dr. Ford found out and killed Bernard, got her out of the way, and then decided to make a new host so that no one would know that Bernard was gone. So, I mean, there's definitely some credence to that, and we'll find out in the next 3 episodes. Thanks so much for writing in. The next one comes from Anthony. Anthony writes in, "Good morning, guys. Thoroughly enjoy the podcast and the community interaction on social media. My question involves the fate of Bernard. Now that he has discovered that he is a host, do you think it seems likely that Ford resets him so that he forgets this fact, or that Ford would allow Bernard to retain his knowledge of being a host? It would seem plausible that either way to me. I could see Ford resetting Bernard to maintain the status quo, but that may raise red flags to the board as to why he would still be around after they fired him. Also, if he does reset him, it would raise an interesting question. How many times has Bernard discovered this in his past, only to be reset/rolled back to the past? If Ford was to keep Bernard with this knowledge, I could see him using it as a sign of power to the board that he was able to have a host in the company without anyone possibly knowing. Just curious on your thoughts. Keep up the good work. That's Tony M. from Mankato, Minnesota. What are your thoughts on this, guys?
We're assuming that brand new host being built is Teresa. What if that's not his plan? What if it's his plan to pin Teresa's murder on Bernard? All you'd have to do is drag Teresa's body out somewhere in the park, let somebody see Bernard running away bloody. You obviously can't let them catch Bernard because they're going to, either put him on trial or do something where they'd realize he wasn't a man. But he could easily kill two birds with one stone. You don't have to reset Bernard. You don't have to replace Teresa just by letting Teresa be murdered by Bernard.
Interesting that you said that if they put him on trial, they would not, or they would notice that he wasn't a man. In doing some research, I found out that they're actually, like, the hosts are not biologically that different from humans. Jonathan Nolan actually said, like, the only, like, real key factor is that their brains don't require oxygen, and that they can't, like, they can't die exactly the same ways that we can. But it would be, I mean, who's to say someone couldn't undergo trial and be convicted and still be a host and no one would know the wiser? I mean, I agree that that would be a very risky move, but it is interesting to know if you pin it on him, then, that kind of just ties up both knots there.
But let's think about this, guys. The other question you raised, how often or how many times has Bernard done this? I mean, you don't think that this is the first time Bernard has killed for Dr. Ford, do we?
Oh, I think it easily could be the first time he's killed for Dr. Ford. I don't see any evidence otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's the first time that Ford has had a host kill someone, but I think it's the first time for Bernard. In Bernard's normal daily activities, I don't think he is someone you would use to kill someone. He's too valuable. His position, he's high enough up. He has access to the entire park. He's a perfect puppet. You wouldn't risk him just to kill someone. He had to do it with Teresa because she forced his hand.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree here. I think that Dr. Ford has been using Bernard as his hatchet man, and after these things happen, I think he resets him. But we'll see.
But he's so bad at killing. Like, he just kind of pushes people into walls. Like, it's not, I mean, like, Clementine, she can, I mean, same method of lethality, but, like, the beatdown was much more impressive.
Oh, you're only saying that because of Emily's email. You're trying to protect yourself.
You see right through me.
Emily, this is all your fault.
Thanks so much for writing in. Next one comes from Thomas Larson. Tom L. writes, Gentlemen, I am surprised that no one has commented on the striking similarity between the drawings of the Delos workers that Maeve produced and the doll that seemingly Native American girl dropped to the Hopi Katsina dancers and figures. And he also posted a picture here. For those not familiar with Katsina dancers and their significance in Hopi culture, here is a brief explanation of what they are. Katsina dolls are figures carved typically from cottonwood root by Hopi people to instruct young girls and new brides about Katsinas or Ketsanim, the immortal beings that bring rain, control other aspects of the nature world and society, and act as messengers between humans and the spirit world. By this definition, the role of the Katsina is eerily similar to how a Delos or Westworld employee might be perceived as a host. The employees and Katsinas both have complete mastery of their natural world and literally function as the go-between for the host and the humans visiting the park. As I think as we keep watching and the story develops, after one strips away from the power struggles between the leadership of Delos and Westworld, this is a story of creation. At its core, Westworld is a rumination on the origins of life that burrows from and attempts to synthesize the creation myths from multiple cultures and religions. While it leans heavily on Hopi creation stories, it also blends elements of Christianity and the struggle between Lucifer and a god that wants to control over his creation. To that end, it would not surprise me if we do not see Dolores or Maeve or Teddy actually eat an apple or some other fruit before their conscious awakening is totally realized. Keep up the great work, and I cannot wait for Sunday, Tom. What do we think about this idea? Gene, you've got your hand raised.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but didn't you bring up Kachina dolls like weeks ago when
did.
the first one was dropped?
I believe I did.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's something we've been conscious of, and Tom, thank you for the kind of drawing the lines there and making clear the parallels. I don't disagree. I think that the story operates on a lot of different levels, and it would be folly to try to pin it to one thing, whether it be Christianity or American Indian lore. And so it's smart to know this is a story of creation, and at its core, I mean, again, if you look at the opening credits and the prevalent theme throughout the whole thing is creation. So you're spot on. Thank you for the email.
Our next one comes from another Connor. He writes in, "Hey guys, absolutely amazing podcast. I love it. I just wanted to point out the story that Bernard reads to his son in the beginning of this episode. He talks about a madman and how in his world everything that is real isn't. I feel like this is just one big fat premonition for the whole series, where Dr. Ford is, as we have seen in this episode, a petty, maniacal guy, maybe even a madman. And Bernard's life, it's real to him, but in Ford's world, it's not real. Crazy stuff. I had to rewind it, and when I listened to it again, I got goosebumps and told my wife, something is going down in this episode. Also, what door? Keep up the great work, guys. Your podcast is so much fun to listen to during my 1.5 hour commute in the mornings. Cheers." That's Connor from Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So, Gene, you want to tackle this?
Yeah, so Bernard is reading from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, right? So if you look at Alice in Wonderland, there's a lot of parallels there, and I've even thought with Dolores' appearance, they definitely kind of took some cues from Alice in that. So a lot of people dismiss Alice in Wonderland because they've seen like the Disney version of it, But if you really read the actual book, there's some heavy stuff going on there about the nature of reality, and about what is sane and what is mad. So I encourage you, if you get a chance, Connor, if you haven't already, definitely read Alice in Wonderland, because it's got or Through the Looking Glass, right? Is that the sequel to it?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, yeah. So those both excellent to check out. We can even add them to our Amazon store. Do we call it a store? Is it an emporium? What's it called?
It's an Amazon affiliate store, but we've started to add products throughout the site. So where we talk about A Brave New World, you can actually click on it and buy a copy from Amazon, and we get a couple pennies. Help keep the lights on.
Thanks, Connor, for writing in. The next one comes from Joel S. Joel writes, Raj, Big D, and Gene, I thoroughly enjoy the podcast. All three of you provide thoughtful analysis and add to the Westworld experience. I may mix up your identities, so I apologize in advance, but please, you may really appreciate this, or you may believe this is a tinfoil hat theory. My guess is you'll agree with it. Quick question. Do you believe that there is a relationship between Ghost Nation and Ford's Ghost family? Specifically, Ford refers to his family as ghost hosts in episode 6. Could Ford have created a group of ghost hosts with the sole purpose of maintaining order within Westworld? Specifically, these ghost hosts will destroy any host containing Arnold's rebellion. This group is called Ghost Nation. If I recall correctly, Big D or Gene advances the theory that certain hosts are going off loop and rebelling. These hosts identify around the maze logo and are seemingly organizing to destroy Westworld from within. For example, Big D argued that the nitroglycerin is an act of rebellion presumably initiated by Arnold's code to destroy Westworld. Just as Ford uses Bernard as a ghost host to maintain control of Westworld from the outside, could Ghost Nation be Ford's attempt to maintain control within Westworld? Again, the internal threat of Westworld is Arnold's code that gives hosts the free will to break out of their loop by destroying Westworld. Specifically, Maeve has Arnold's code, and Ghost Nation is an effort to destroy her and prevent her from breaking out of her loop. As Raj pointed out, I believe William and Dolores will stop Ghost Nation from destroying Maeve in the Prairie House timeline, which enables Arnold's code to carry out its intent of free will, which we are witnessing in the most present timeline. What do you guys think? Please respond if you have a spare moment. Again, I love your podcast and looking forward to future podcasts. That comes from Joel. Gene, I'm sorry we didn't get this email earlier, because I want to add ghost hosts to the Westword glossary.
Oh yeah, I think I could jump right in and edit that one, make it a nice round 10 with ghost hosts. Although I don't know, Joel, if anybody else is going to support the term ghost hosts. Although I like it, it's just fun to say.
So, Raj, why don't you tell us about this one, since you're the one who loved it?
All right, so this is so I voted for this email and I wanted to keep it in because I think it goes along with the idea that Dr. Ford has an army of hosts that they don't follow the rules, right? That are within Westworld. And we see a couple of examples of that. The first are his family, right? His ghost family. The family of ghosts that don't exist. They're off the grid, right? They don't respond to verbal commands, and they can't be tracked. Secondly, we see what would appear to be hosts wearing crazy masks, and they circle around Teddy and they beat him to a pulp and they tie him to trees. We're supposed to believe that's Wyatt's the gang, but what if that's again Dr. Ford's ghost hosts? That's protecting Westworld from the inside. These ghost hosts, they aren't necessarily ghosts, but they're hosts with the most that don't agree. You know, they've got supernatural powers, right? They scare people, and they come out of nowhere, and they can't be killed. They can't be stopped, right? They haunt people and other hosts within the park. Ghost hosts.
So my follow-up question is this. Was my theory that ridiculous?
Yours was 10 times more ridiculous than that one.
No, absolutely not. Dick, your theory was backed up with a little bit of logic there. There were things in the show that supported it. So with Ghost Nation, we see them get killed. So that's out. They also don't seem to have any superpowers. They're using bows and arrows and riding horses. Seems pretty normal to me. How they relate to Ford's family. Again, you're the guy, Raj, who thought Ford's family was dressing up in costumes, including little Tommy, and going out and old Robo-Dad and beating people up.
They are.
No.
They're ghost hosts.
They're not ghost hosts.
You're ridiculous.
I mean, they are ghost hosts, but Ghost Nation is just Ghost Nation, man. I mean, let's
only similarity is the word ghost. And I want you to know, who was this email from?
This is from Joel.
Okay, Joel, just so you know, Raj has had a rough week. He went to Columbus. He watched the U.S. men's team, get smoked. Then last night, the U.S. team again got smoked again. He's had a rough week. So when he really, really, really wanted your Ghost Nation email, we put it in. If you could have seen him smiling as he was reading it, your email was the only bit of joy this poor man has had all week. So we could not hold that back from him. But I got to tell you, that shit's crazy. Both of you are crazy.
Thanks, Joel, so much for writing in. The next email telegraph comes from Chris C. Chris C. writes, hey, guys, really love the podcast. You have great chemistry and some brilliant thoughts. I don't know after tonight that often underscore my own.
Hold on. We have lost all credibility tonight. There's no more great ideas coming out of us.
We might as well close shop after tonight. He writes, I typically try to watch each episode 3 times to catch everything and sometimes another after hearing you guys. Had a theory without a ton of rigor, but I discovered some slight nods to the fact that Man in Black is dying, and this is literally his last ride. 3 key reasons. Number 1, he mentions in the first episode that he's never going back, assumedly because he's going to find out what's in the maze and discover eternal life of some sort. Number 2, in the bar scene with Ford and Teddy, Ford punts a few of Man in Black's questions, noticing that there's a newfound anxiousness in the Man in Black that is new to his character, that finding the maze as quick as possible is paramount. And in number 3, in a jail scene with Hector, he mentions that it usually takes 3 days for someone to come rescue villains like him, and he doesn't have the time. Other theories. Man in Black has a foundation that creates synthetic human organs that have saved tons of lives. I think this must have come about after he saved the park all those years ago and got stocked, technology, etc., and used it for the real world. My thought is that part of his body is maimed or burned, and that he is partially synthetic or android. Hence, we not seeing the skin outside of his face theory you brought up once or twice, the accident 35 years ago, and that number 2, Maeve will bring Armistice, Hector, and others to the lab and stage a coup, killing a large chunk of staff until they get shut down or decommissioned at the end of the season. Maeve is a fan favorite, and it wouldn't be HBO unless they killed someone we love. Thanks, guys, and curious if you have similar thoughts. Gene, you want to attack this first?
So why is he picking, Hector and Armistice? Are they doing a host draft where Maeve gets to pick the baddest host out there? What's the correlation there? Why all of a sudden is she picking them? Other than what she's had with Hector, and then what, Hector brings her in?
I feel like a lot of these emails are like first dates when you're like you're going out with the person and you're like, okay, yeah, your first 3 key reasons as to why the man in black might be dying, totally. And then other theory number 1, that the foundation. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm with you. And then we get into this weird, like, yeah, Maeve will bring Armistice, Hector, and others to the lab after all dying at once to stage a coup. Not with you on that. But let's get back to the key meat of this, that the man in black is dying. This is actually a really interesting take on it. He seems very strong. He doesn't seem like he's having any health issues. I mean, yeah, he's older, but he's arguably the strongest person, there. He's lethal. He's tenacious. So I don't see it in the physicality, but in the clues about never going back, about and then about his impatience in these scenes. It does make you wonder, why is he on the clock?
I don't know. But again, those first 3 points were good.
Yeah.
And then in the host draft, if the 2 of you are planning a coup and you can draft 3 hosts for your team, who are you drafting?
Yeah, Gene, you want to tackle this first?
Well, I know I'm not drafting Bernard because he's awful at killing people. Let's see. I would have to go
make
with...
Emily happy. Take Clementine.
No, I take Armistice. Armistice is way tougher than Clem. I take Armistice. Hector, I think Hector's kind of soft, man. I don't see him as being as lethal. Maybe, what I take is Armistice, Rebus, because he's just a hoot and a holler, and maybe Teddy. I like to see Teddy's dark side.
Raj?
Yeah, I would take Dr. Ford's young Clippy, right? Young Dr. Ford, because nothing's scarier than a little kid in shorts and long sleeve shirt that he's just a serial killer, right? Like Children of the Corn style. So there's that, and he looks like he'd be small and shifty, right? So there's that one. Then I'd also pick Maeve, right? Because she's crazy, right? And she can do things. And then I'd pick Ghost Host. That would be my third one. Ghost Host. Any of them. It doesn't matter which Ghost Host it is. Probably Dr. Ford's Arnold father. Because he's got a history of violence and drinking and beating people. But yeah, any Ghost Host will do. Ghost Nation.
I'd also like to give honorable mention to Dongbot. I would take Dongbot as a backup second string quarterback.
Okay, I would have to take, of course, Maeve. She's a 20. We've already seen that she can handle herself, and now that she's like the character you have in Madden, who's maxed out. That's Bo Jackson in Tecmo Bowl. You can't tackle her. She's number 1. You got to take Clem, because Clem has no problem just putting people's heads through glass. And then for the last one, you know what? I'm taking our old friend Peter Abernathy. I bet you he would have a good tale along the road, and I bet you he could throw down. He was a lawman.
If there was ever one host that I just wanted to see kill a human, it would be Peter Abernathy. It would bring me so much pleasure.
Can I switch out one of mine? Can I switch out Maeve? No, I want to switch out Maeve.
No, only if you switch out Ghost Nation.
No, I'm switching out. I'm switching out Maeve. And I'm going to old Bill down in the thing, because Bill would distract everyone else with his herky jerky movements and his stories about the girl in the white shoes, and trying to toast everyone to where little Robert Ford would go around stabbing people in the necks, and then Ghost Nation would be right there with him.
If old Bill was forced to go on a road trip with you, he'd be the first host to kill themselves.
The second one, because we've already seen one bash over the head.
Oh yeah, I should have taken the wood chopper. Wood chopper.
He's not good for conversation on the road.
No.
Thanks so much for writing in. Next one comes from Rich. Rich writes in, guys, I've been loving your show and plan to listen avidly to future shows, but I think you guys fell asleep at the switch in your last podcast, as you may have missed a few theories that seem quite plausible, maybe even obvious to me. Perhaps you were getting all swept up in that fantastic storytelling of the last 2 episodes, and your analysis is taking a back seat. Emoticon winky face. And guys, he has 4 different theories. It's kind of long, but there's one in particular. Again, we'll post all 4 of them on shatontv.com, but there's one that I want to read and get your opinion on. He writes in, on tonight's podcast, you guys completely missed that the title, Gene, how do I say this?
Trompe-le.
Which means deceive the eye, is referring to the fact that Bernard was a host and himself embodied a walking, Gene?
Trompe-le.
Whose inhumanity was only revealed in this episode. He is just beautifully rendered work of art that deceived the viewer. The title also nicely harkens to the new
Trompe-l'œil,
aka Host, which will take the place of Teresa, and indeed perhaps has already taken the place of any number of human characters, perhaps even Ford himself. So what he's saying is that the French word
Trompe-l'œil
actually means host, and it's deceiving the viewers, right? It's deceiving us.
Yeah, I like it's the fact that he also harkens back to the use of art that we've heard before. Ford referenced that the best artists hide in their work, and this is truly a work of art. And I think also that it's for us, the viewer, the show is deceiving to us. That in the end, we're going to find out that everything we've believed, and whether it's the purpose of the park, who's real, who's not, what their intentions are, that we are being forced to see a story which necessarily is not real.
What if it's all virtual reality?
Hell no.
As Carrie points out, maybe we're all just in the VR break room.
No, that's a no-go. I will not take the end of Lost where they go into a church and it was all some form of purgatory, that they had all died. If it's VR or that, I'm out.
No season 2 for you.
No.
All right. Thanks so much for writing. Our final and last email we saved for last because it's pretty wacky, guys. I always like to save the wackiest for the last. It's entitled The Rabbit Hole, so it's a perfect title. It comes from Jordan Smith. He writes in, "Hey guys, that was a huge reveal this week with Bernard being a host. This week's Rabbit Hole is brought to you by interplanetary travel. That's right. Stay with me. I had an idea that Westworld doesn't have to be on Earth. That could be a huge bombshell to drop at the end of the season. Panning back. Holy shit, we're not on Earth. Think about it. There's already nowhere on Earth that you can't fairly easily reach within a day's travel. The employees are there for long periods of time, and it's apparently difficult to contact the outside world. Come on, I can FaceTime with someone halfway around the world without any added expense. This all takes place in a time when Man in Black mentioned that they can cure any disease, so it isn't a hard stretch to think that there is considerable overpopulation going on, and the amount of space required for Westworld is probably hard to come by on Earth. It would certainly give them plenty more options for storylines heading forward, too, since we have never seen what life looks like outside of Westworld. Anyways, that's my foil hat for the week. Thanks for indulging my craziness, Jordan. Gene, you've got your hand raised.
Okay, I hate to bring stuff from outside the show up, but let's get into this. So, in interviews with Tandy Newton, she said that this is, presumably about 80 years, or she's hinted that it's about 80 years into the future. So we're looking about like the year 2100. Okay. Whether we have interplanetary travel or not, who knows? But to this extent, where they would open an amusement park in another world, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. Jonathan Nolan also has said that that the size, or again, none of these are direct quotes, but I'm paraphrasing, that the size of Westworld is approximately 500 square miles. There are landowners today who have 500 square miles, and that's not a rarity. I mean, that's you can get that. And so it's not inconceivable to think that especially if people are living in huge metropolis or not living on Earth, that there would be space on Earth for this sort of an operation. One interesting point about that, though, is that another thing Jonathan Nolan said was that the hosts, their brains don't need oxygen. And that's an interesting thing to point out. It's something that wouldn't just come up in conversation. It's kind of a very specific thing to note. So it is interesting to note that and say, okay, well, if that's the case, then, is that something that they're working on? Is it because they're, would they have uses outside of Earth? And what's going on here? But from all the indications that I've seen from every interview, and other podcasts, blogs that I've read, this is on Earth. That's the indication that we were given.
If this is in space, wouldn't there be a better adventure than going back to the Old West and recreating horses? Wouldn't there be some, spaceman where you're out flying a jet? That would be like a kid today, turning down a chance to go to Space Mountain at Disney and instead saying, I want to go on a little baby tricycle and drive around my driveway. You're downgrading the adventure. So now I'm going to add this to my list of things that would make me get out. The end of Lost, we have in a church. We have this, it's in space. and also virtual reality.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, again, I can't see why I would travel the long distance to go to Mars, right? The next closest possible inhabitable planet, right? That they're thinking of terraforming to make human life possible. To only to go on a vacation and live out my old West, Wild West fantasies based on Earth. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It reminds me of Futurama, where they go to Mars, and Mars is basically an all wild, Wild West, planet. But thanks for writing in. I really appreciate it, Jordan. We hopefully indulged your craziness, but yeah, I think this is on Earth, buddy.
I do want to point out, Jordan, though, that as far as prose goes, you really nailed it, because I got the mental image of like the back. Holy shit, we're not on Earth. That's literally what my brain would be doing in that. That would be my brain's narration of that scene. So I think we're on the same wavelength here. Just and I wouldn't rule out space. Honestly, I wouldn't. It just doesn't seem plausible based on all the stuff I'm basing it on is from stuff that I learned outside the show, and they could be trying to throw us off. So who knows?
Thanks so much for writing it. Guys, that's our top 20 emails of the week. That's our top 20 Telegraph. So guys, before we shut down the Telegraph one last time, is there anything we want to promote or talk about before Sunday's episode of Westworld?
Where can people get those sweet Shat on TV t-shirts?
Yeah, if you go to Twitter right now, we're running a contest to win one of the first runs. It's serial number 0001 of the Abernathy Farms Milk is for Growing Boys Shat on TV t-shirt. So we're going to be giving one away. All you got to do is go on to Twitter, find the post, and retweet it. And we'll be giving it away, I think, in 2 weeks. So you have a chance to win it. And then also we're going to be doing, because we have a limited run, we're going to actually send out emails to everybody who submitted an email to the Telegraph or commented on the website with an opportunity to purchase one. And we should get that out to you by Sunday. So you'll have an opportunity to get one of the first limited edition Shat on TV t-shirts, and we have 2 different designs that you'll have a choice to pick from. One is about the maze, and then the other one is a likeness of Walter with the Abernathy Farms, which you can see on Twitter. But go over there, retweet, and get a chance to get one for free.
So that's how they enter in the contest. They go on Twitter, they follow Shat on TV, and then they retweet to their followers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah, the shirts look awesome. They look fantastic. You can find us everywhere on social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're at Shat on TV. You can also email us to be part of the Westworld Telegraph. So send in those emails to hosts@shatontv.com. And again, you can read all of the emails that we discussed today in their long form versions at our website, shatontv.com. Click the Westworld Telegraph. There's photos, there's links to other things that we've talked about, and you can see that all there. Gene, I think you also mentioned that you're now on Twitter, but also we're soon to be on Snapchat. Is that correct?
That's right. I've joined Twitter. I was tired of having to bite my tongue or message from Shat on TV and then put a little Gene on the end. I wanted to make it very distinct that I was saying what I was saying, because I didn't want you guys to have to take the flak for my controversial opinions and inflammatory statements. So there's now, I am at Gene_Lyons_, because apparently Gene Lyons and Gene Lyons 1 through 5 were all taken. So, and Gene_Lyons was taken. So in any event there. And then also we are on Snapchat now at Shat on TV. I will be basically using that Snapchat to go ahead and post video clips, also like announcing when the podcast is coming out. You might get some sneak peeks of us actually recording, and also just announcing different things that are going on and odd Westworld stuff. We actually, Roger and I actually both kind of live near the actual Westworld.
That's right.
In Arizona, and we may even go run around there and wreak some havoc, and you can catch that on Snapchat. So if you're on Snapchat, go ahead and add us, and I will be posting our what are they called? The snap graphic. What the hell are they called? Our snap code, basically, on the site too. So you can just go ahead and snap that with your phone. But if you are on Snapchat, go ahead and add us at Shat on TV.
Also, once again, if you have a suggestion for a television series that you would like us to dive into and do similar to what we've done here with Westworld, once Westworld ends, we're looking to do that. Even though Westworld has been renewed, it's probably not going to come back till 2018. So, guys, fill our days. Fill our days. We don't want to. We got a great thing coming. We want to keep riding this tsunami of love and support from the audience. So you can email us, host again at shadontv.com. You can also leave a 5-star review for us on iTunes. The really, really good ones we tweet out and post on Instagram. So thanks for that. And again, it keeps us going, keeps us in that top 5 position of iTunes TV and film podcasts. So thanks again from the bottom of our heart. This is not just us blowing Yul Brynner smoke out of our faces at you. This is from the bottom of our heart. On behalf of my 2 co-hosts, Gene Lyons and the Big D, Dick Ebert, my name is Roger, saying we'll see you next time here on the Westworld Telegraph. See ya!